Signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti alla casa italiana zerilli-marimò della New York University, and I'm going to continue in English, don't worry. It's a great pleasure to have you back, members of Save Venice, members of Casa Italiana, and all of you who are friends of Italian culture. We are overwhelmed by this very lively participation, and we are sorry for the people who could not find a seat. We should have thought that putting in the same line Venice, sex, and love, we would have filled any auditorium to capacity. And of course, the presence of the speaker, Sunny Evers, adds to the appeal of the whole evening. In a few minutes, I'm going to give the microphone to one of the board members of Save Venice to officially introduce Dr. Evers. But I just wanted to tell you, as an anticipation, that a year from now, all of New York is going to be Venetian. Some of you might know that Carnegie Hall is presenting a festival that is going to last for the whole month of February 3rd to the 21st, called La Serenissima, Music and Arts from the Venetian Republic. So most of the musical programs are going to take place at Carnegie Hall, but many other institutions, including Casa Italiana and Save Venice and the Morgan Library and the Italian Cultural Institute and many others, are involved in presenting parallel programs. So I think in the week of February 7th, we're going to have 3 events that include 2 theatrical pieces. One is going to be a sort of mise en scène of the memoir by Carlo Goldoni, that has never been put on stage in this country. And another one is a sort of premiere worldwide. It's the English translation of The Worth of Women. There is a piece written by a Venetian writer about why women are better than men. And I'm sure we all agree, no matter what your gender is. But it's going to be fun and interesting because it has been performed in Venetian in Italy very recently, only once, and it's going to be presented here by our own theatrical company residents. So stay tuned for that. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce Ted Rapp, who is a professor emeritus of history at Princeton University and a board member of Save Venice. Thank you all again and welcome to Casa Italiana.
It's an enormous privilege for me to introduce my fellow board member, Sunny Evers. I've been a member of the Save Venice board for about 20 years, but I've known Sunny much longer than that. A few years longer than that. And I've always admired her persistence, her determination to remain in tune with so much that is going on in the world of scholarship and in the world of restoration in Venice. She wrote a wonderful dissertation on Veronese. Veronese is one of the great pleasures that Save Venice has. It's been restoring Veroneses for some years now, and Sunny has been an enormous contributor to that. She has taught, she has lectured, she manages to keep so many balls up in the air, and it is a real privilege to be able to introduce her to all of you. She's going to talk about visualizing love in the Renaissance.
It's a huge pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm actually going to experiment because I don't really want to be stuck behind the mic, but I'm not sure I can be double-fisted. So this is going to be a bit of an experiment. I'm a little overwhelmed by all of you here. I wasn't expecting to have a full house, but I guess who can resist Venice, love, sex, whatever. My hope tonight is that we're going to have some fun, and we're going to look at spectacularly beautiful images. And before I really get into it, it's really important that I say so much of what I am going to be talking about and what I've been thinking about over the many years is built on the foundation of some extraordinary scholars, two of whom are no longer with us. David Rosand, who was an essential member of Save Venice and head of the projects committee, and Rona Goffin, who really broke ground in how to look at images of women. And then somebody who is here, I have to call out to, is Pat Brown, with whom I went to Berkeley, so many years ago. And her work on Venice has been seminal, and I'm really thrilled that she's here. Today, what I want to do is share with you my thinking and kind of try to pull the curtain away from what art historians do. So I'm hoping not to be intensely serious, and I'm hoping to give you some insights about some beautiful paintings that will expand beyond the specific examples of what we're looking at, and will fill you with curiosity and joy as you go through your life and go to museums. So I want to begin with two stories about me, not really about me, but which colored how I think about these works. And they go quite a far way back to I think it's 1990. Yeah, to 1990, when there was a fantastic exhibit called Titian, Prince of Painters. That was in the Ducal Palace in Venice, and then traveled to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. I was in Venice trying to figure out what I was doing with my life, trying to do research on Veronese, and my sister asked me if I would take the group through the exhibit the following day. That night, they had invited a preeminent art historian, Sir John Pope Hennessy, to give a lecture. And I was still kind of young enough, I was going, oh wow, I've never heard him speak. And I sat in the audience waiting for his pearls of wisdom, and all was going well until he put that on the screen and said, and I can't imitate him, but he had kind of a squeaky nasal voice with a British accent. And he said that there was nothing remotely sexual or sensual about this image. I don't remember a single other word he said. I thought my career in the world in Venetian art was over. How could I possibly be looking at this image and seeing something utterly different? And I really thought I was done. You know, I couldn't challenge him, and I knew that everybody in the audience was nodding their head and going along with this extremely important scholar. And I thought, oh dear. So over the years, this started my thinking, like, wait a minute. Is he seeing something different than I'm seeing? And it wasn't very long ago, actually, that I was reading his autobiography, and I learned something about him, but I also learned something about me. And I'm going to quote him. So when I say I, it's Pope Hennessy. One of the things about art history that I, Pope Hennessy, found puzzling from the first was that clever art historians, there were stupid ones too, of course, but a lot of them were really clever, should reach diametrically opposite conclusions on the basis of a tiny nucleus of evidence. The reason, so far as one could judge, was that the subjective element in art history was disproportionately large. If this were so, it was not only works of art that needed to be looked at in the original, but art historians too, since their results were a projection of their personalities. Okay, so I don't need to tell you much more about Sir John, but clearly Sir John was not enticed by voluptuous women. So let's just take a moment and look at this image. This is how we're going to kind of get to where we're going. From my perspective, this is all about love and sexuality and sensuality. We are, in fact, very much like the organ player or the dog. We're enraptured with a very beautiful, fleshy, sensuous woman. And Titian uses all the powers of his art to transport us into a space and a place filled with texture. Look at the soft velvet, the silk, the satin, the flesh, everything is there so that we not only use our eyes, but we have a sense of all the sensations. And when we go a little bit farther, there's about every erotic game in town here. I mean, you look at the pipes, and you look at his sword, and you look at him looking where he's looking, and, come on. And so that started me. Like, first I was shocked that I was going to fail as an art historian, but then I started going, okay, why are there so many images like this? Because this is the first of a whole series of reclining Venuses. And I want to draw attention to the difference and how we know that the one on the top, which is in Madrid, is the first. Those two people look like people, real people. He's got a distinctive face, a pointy nose. She has a kind of a pointier face too. They look like individuals. If you go down here, all the ingredients are the same, but they look much more idealized or generic. Here's my fantasy, and some of what we're going to talk about tonight is indeed my fantasies. All right, this was probably commissioned, I would imagine, to go in a bedroom to celebrate a marriage. Now, we need to talk a little bit about marriage in the Renaissance. It's a bit different now. You would be about a 12, 13-year-old girl, sometimes even younger, and you wouldn't know who you were marrying. Your father would have arranged it, and you'd meet the guy who was often closing in on 30 for the first time and would be expected to consummate the marriage because it wasn't legal until it was consummated, and then the guy could get the dowry. Well, you better have something in that bedroom to make it work, right? So imagine that these images were conducive to creating a successful marriage. So that's where I'm going to show you ones that are documented in relation to a marriage. We don't really know specifically the wedding. We do know the patron, but we don't know if it's specifically related to a wedding. So somebody sees this and goes, wow, what a good idea. So let's go get Titian's workshop to do some more, okay? And that's how we're introducing here. And I want to just point out that I was not very long ago in a kind of a palazzo in San Francisco from venture capitalists, and this picture was hanging opposite their bedroom bed. And I thought, I think I'd rather have Titian. But I don't think it's unfair to say that Lucian Freud manipulates paint in much the same way that Titian does. So we're all human, and sometimes I think scholars forget that art speaks to human needs, and we haven't changed very much. Maybe our customs have changed, but our feelings really haven't. So now I have one other story to go back to Pope Hennessy's We Bring Ourselves With Us. I was looking at feminist art, trying to teach a class on women's studies, and I was kind of spending a little time with Judy Chicago, and I had actually seen the dinner party in San Francisco, I think in 1976, and I was in my 20s, and I thought, oh, what is this? But I've kind of gotten more interested in the dinner party, which is now in the Brooklyn Museum. So immediately following thinking about and looking at Judy Chicago's work, I went in to teach a class on portraits of women. And I was talking about one of my favorite images, Raphael's Donna Volata, and talking about what a complex image it is and why it has such power, really because it's this intense balance of opposites. She is both demure and incredibly seductive. She is virginal with that veil, but what gesture is she doing? I even had one student swear that this hand was not hers, but it was somebody. Okay, so we're talking about this, and that's why this work of art is so extraordinary, is because it communicates, it speaks to us, it grabs us. And then I moved on to, I hope you can guess where I'm going. I then moved on to the extraordinary manipulation of paint and that sleeve. And that sleeve counteracts all the demureness of her as it projects into our space, and it really is a celebration of texture, of the love of paint, and I'm talking, and I'm looking, and I go, no. And what do I think? No. And of course my students go, what? So I had to Google, right? And I said, and they went, ew, right? And I said, whoa. And of course I thought, unconscious. No, Raphael could not be painting his lover's vagina. I couldn't go there, right? But I think you have to agree that it's a very vaginal sleep. And I said, well, okay, if this woman is the woman he loved, and if we go to Vasari basically said he died from having too much sex. I'm not going to read it all for you because I tend to have too much to say anyway. But this basically is Vasari's description of why Raphael died so young. He was exhausted and he got sick, exhausted from too much sex. So I said, well, okay, the sleeve is his celebration of his love, and no, it's not literal. But then, I think it was in 2008, the Met had an amazing exhibit called Art and Love in the Renaissance. And again, lots of what I'm talking about was talked about and exhibited in this exhibit. And I go into the print room, I could say the pornography room, and I come up against this, which is large. Each one of these panels is about this big. And I'm looking, okay, the triumph of the phallus, and I looked at the tree, and I thought, well, if a tree can look like a vagina, why can't stuff? And then I began to say, well, maybe it's not unconscious. Maybe it's more conscious than I was then able to kind of first embrace. So I brought myself with me. If I hadn't been looking at Judy Chicago, I think I still would have loved Raphael's Donna Vellata, but I would have loved it in a different way. I would have thought about it in a different way. And now I'm thinking about it in a much more provocative way. And then I was looking at these two. So this is the same woman, supposedly. It's his beloved. And all of a sudden I realized, one, I think the clothed version is more enticing. But then I was looking at this and realizing that basically he's taken her clothes off but kept the hands pointing to the same area. So we have a very similar gesture where she's probably about to take her clothes off. And then here, this lower hand is covering her private parts, which she's already represented there. So kind of an interesting way that paintings begin to speak if you give them the time and the focus and allow them to communicate. Plus, we have to learn a different language. We have to learn their language. And coming back to human needs and human interest, again, we're going to come back to Titian's Venus of Urbino, but maybe they're both of these, the Lucian Freud and the Titian, fulfill the same human needs, which is why you're all here. We want to talk about love. Okay, now to get to the meat of everything. To celebrate the coordination between Save Venice and Friends of Florence, who are restoring Tiepolo drawings and this Maestro di Maria in Isola, I thought, well, let me go to Florence first. Because really, in my looking at, these are what we're going to talk about today, so I know Veronese. While I was really trying to teach Botticelli well, it gave me a real understanding of the function of these paintings in terms of marriage. So we're going to be looking at Botticelli's Primavera, Birth of Venus, and Venus and Mars. And then we're going to move up to Venice and look at Giorgione's Reclining Venus, Venus of Urbino, and Sacred and Profane Love. Okay? All right. So in 1550, Vasari saw these two paintings in the Medici villa at Castello. And so for generations, for years, scholars said, okay, these were commissioned as a pair by a Medici, and the two aspects of Venus. Until the 1499 inventory of the Medici collection was discovered, and it was discovered that the Primavera wasn't part of the Birth of Venus commission. It was rather commissioned along with these two others. And what scholars were kind of ignoring, and which is going to become very important, is this one is on wood, and this one is on canvas. Very few Florentine paintings are on canvas, and you're going to see that that's going to have some importance down the road. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so we're going to look at these as a suite of paintings that we know were commissioned by, probably by Lorenzo the Magnificent for his ward, Lorenzo. Sorry, they have all the same names. So this Lorenzo, I'll call Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco, okay? Now, it was commissioned in 1482, probably, and this was a rough time for the Medici. So Lorenzo's father, Piero, dies in 1469. Lorenzo begrudgingly becomes the head of the family. And then in 1476, Pierfrancesco dies and leaves his two sons, who are still minors, under the guardianship of their cousin, Lorenzo the Magnificent. 2 years later, Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother, Giuliano, dies, murdered. And this is a rotten time for the Medici because all of Italy, including the Pope, are really ganging up on him. Plus, Lorenzo is spending too much money. He's not behaving like his grandfather would have approved of. And I think also in 1478, he needs money. And he takes the inheritance of these two and spends it. They ultimately get it back in 1485, but one has to say, where did he get that money? So how do you make money magically appear in the Renaissance? You arrange a really good marriage. So Lorenzo went on the move, and he found, I don't have her portrait, but he found the right candidate. Her name is Semirande d'Appiano, and her father had the iron mines in Elba, the port at Piombino, and was related through marriage with this nasty guy, the king of Naples, King Ferrante. Lorenzo goes, sweet talks everybody. He spends 3 years arranging this marriage, and ultimately gets the rich bride with all these mercantile benefits and a link to King Ferrante, who had been in league with Sixtus IV against the Medici in 1478. So this is a key marriage, worth working hard for, and one could say worth making sure that it was going to be successful. So it is typically, in the Renaissance, the groom or the father of the groom's responsibility to decorate the bedroom. So these are two, I don't have photographs from Renaissance bedrooms, but these give you a sense of how these rooms were decorated with painting, often mythological, built into beds and into panels behind beds, and then into great chests, which I'm not really going to show you. So these three works were not in what we know now. Am I right? No, hold on. Where are the Medici? There. Not in the Medici Palace, but in the old Medici Palace. And they were commissioned for the bedroom of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco. Okay? So let's look at the message that they are communicating. The Primavera is a very beautiful yet strange painting. You have practically life-size figures, 9 of them, who don't seem to know each other. They don't hang together in a story. They're not moving one direction or the other direction. The minute a work of art looks strange, and we have to allow ourselves to look at something in a museum and say, what is this about? We have to dig, and we have to learn a language, and we have to try to understand what the message is. So in order to do that, we have to figure out who the people are, and in order to do that, we have to look at some literary sources. So we get the main characters from Lucretius, all but this one. But what Lucretius just gives us who they are. It doesn't tell us how they're represented where they're situated or really what's going on. Then, if we look at Boccaccio, who was being revived just at this time, I mean, kind of been forgotten, and then in the mid-15th century, he became very popular again. And he describes almost to the detail the setting that Botticelli paints. What seemed not less but more delightful than anything else, a meadow of the shortest grass, so green that it seemed almost black, all painted with perhaps 1,000 different sorts of flowers and enclosed all around with the greenish, flourishing orange and citrus trees, which still bore their old fruit as well as their new, and were also in blossom. Okay, so we've got the setting and we've got most of the players. But then we need Ovid to tell us more or less what's going on. So we see, you know, this blue guy with big wings swooping in, bending the laurel trees, and grabbing this luscious female who is even sexier because of her diaphanous clothing. And she's certainly potentially fertile because she's got a rather round stomach, and she's just definitely round. And we know that men are hardwired to be attracted to curvy women because it translates unconsciously that curve, those curves make her fertile. And remember, the purpose of marriage is to procreate. So here we have Zephyrus spying the nymph Chloris, sexy young thing, goes at her, basically grabs her and rapes her. But she then turns into Flora and is a happily married lady. So and this happens in classical antiquity all the time. Rape, then happy marriage, fertile. And certainly the emphasis here, after we got through her stomach, now we see Flora, who also has a rounded abdomen and is tossing roses out, as if she's populating the world around her. Next, wrong way. Next we meet Venus. Now this isn't how we usually think about Venus. We think about Venus coming in on her half shell. This Venus is dressed like a Florentine bride, and actually, as you'll see, kind of like a Venetian bride too, wearing red and white, purity of the white part, because you better be a virgin, and red, because you better have some passion, but don't really let it out, and a little blue for faith or divinity. She's a bit virgin-like, because the role model for every girl is the Virgin Mary, and she's sensual, and yet she's also wearing this jewelry, which has a crescent moon. And the crescent moon is the sign of Diana, the virgin goddess. And that introduces us to one of the real problems for Renaissance girls, women. They're supposed to have all these babies, but they're also supposed to be chaste and not enjoy sex, at least in the 15th century. So there is always this contradiction and this tension inherent in a Renaissance marriage. And Venus here, dressed as a bride, is the patron goddess of marital love, earthly love. And next, above her head, we have Cupid blindfolded, pulling his arrow. There are flames in his arrow, just as there are flames of passion on her clothing. And he's aiming at these very sexy ladies, who all, again, everything about their pose and their clothing is drawing attention to their fertility. Their hands are clasped and they dance kind of emulating harmony. Because in this scene, in this marriage, there better be some harmonious relations to keep it going. And finally, this is from Seneca, who tells us about the Graces dancing and giving benefits and bringing happiness and harmony to all. And we know that the great Venus and the Graces were often invited to weddings, and the wedding of Milan, Isabella somebody or other, that's, if I look it up, maybe I just won't even bother to tell you which, what? Isabella d'Este? Is it? I don't think it is. Is it Isabella d'Este? No, it's not Isabella d'Este. It is, okay, Isabella of Aragon and John Galeazzo Sforza, which was attended by the Medici. The festivities for their marriage were directed by two Florentine artists, Leonardo and the poet Bernardo Bellincioni, who worked for Lorenzo the Magnificent until 1482. At the climax of their marriage celebration, they were visited, actors, the three Graces and Mercury and 7 nymphs and 7 personifications of virtues. They sang a song in praise of the bride, paraded her into the marital chamber for the consummation. So this is what Botticelli does. He's obviously in the Medici world. He's Lorenzo's favorite artist. He's up to date in how weddings were celebrated. He's looking at ancient sculptures. This group of the three Graces was in Siena in the 15th century. And the medal above was for the marriage of Giovanna Galbezzi. So all of this is part of the Florentine tradition of marriages. So we have one more figure here who we haven't really connected. And he's a rather odd guy. I mean, what is he doing? He's turning his back to everything. He is Mercury. His son, Cupid, is also aiming towards him. And what is he doing? And that's why I have this detail. He's using his caduceus to stir the clouds. He's preparing, he's making sure everything is perfect for this gathering in this wooded bower. He's also not only the messenger god, he's the god of eloquence, the god of spring, the son of Maya, so May, and the original date for this marriage was May. And he's also the patron god of commerce and peace. So, Botticelli is in this Medici world. He's painting these paintings for the palace next door. But in Lorenzo's palace, built by his grandfather, in the courtyard is Donatello's David. And one of the ways I've always helped students understand David is when you look at David from afar and you don't notice that he's standing on a severed head, you might think it's Mercury, the god of commerce. So from a distance, you've got Mercury there, and they've been wearing similar hats, even the similar stance, similar wavy hair. So Botticelli's working very much in the Medici idiom. And people disagree whether Mercury is the portrait of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco, or this painting by Botticelli of a man holding the medal with Cosimo de Medici. I fantasize this is actually Lorenzo the Magnificent, and that Mercury is none other than the patron who negotiated this wedding. Took 3 years, and he's going to make damn sure it works, okay? So when we come back to it, let's just recap what's going on here and put it in the context. Imagine you're 12. I don't know, I can't remember how old Semirande was, but imagine you're meeting your husband-to-be for the first time and going in and consummating, all right? So, guy swoops in, grabs girl, rapes her, marries her, all under the auspices of love and marriage. It better be harmonious because this guy wants to make sure it works. I think that's pretty much how it would feel. It really does come down to rape, better produce babies, and better last, okay? All right, now that's the first part of a 3-part harmony, all right? The next image that is documented in this room shows you, no one can really decide, kind of come down to who she is, but she's usually called Camilla, and she's controlling, dominating a centaur. Now, Camilla brings it right up to our face about this contradiction and tension of how do you be chaste and sexual at the same time. Camilla was the son of Medivus, king of the Volsci, And when he was driven from his city, he gives his daughter to Diana for safekeeping. And of course, if you're Diana's attendant, you're a virgin. And she turns down all offers of marriage. So we have virginal goddess, or virginal heroine, taming the epitome or the symbol of unbridled sexuality. Because the centaur being half horse, half human, the horse part is supposed to be uncontrolled sex and the human is supposed to control it, but obviously he's not doing a great job, and so she has to take control. And in fact, the whole image works that way. Very often, when you look at this, you think that's a building. So by controlling nature, making a cliff look architectural, that's also a metaphor for controlling nature, controlling the passions. So if you've got a passionate rape ending up in a marriage, to make it last, it better be under control. And again, Botticelli is working in the Medici idiom, because in the garden behind the main Medici palace, this was in the topping the fountain, Judith conquering the drunken, sexy, sex-crazy Holofernes. So again, we have Botticelli relating his paintings to the world in which he is working. He's working for the Medici. And she is covered in myrtle, which is the symbol of marital fidelity. And on her dress are embroidered all these intertwined diamond rings. She's been claimed as a Medici. That's one of the signs of the Medici family. So here Camilla now is a Medici. Semirande is no longer Dappiano. Semirande is a Medici. And her job is to control the passions of her husband. Now we still have one ingredient that we haven't included. And that would be the Virgin Mary and religion. And not only were girls supposed to see the Virgin Mary as their role model and to emulate her, and that was said very often in sermons, but it was also believed, whenever a man and wife come together, it is advisable only to hang portraits of persons of dignity and handsome appearance, for they say that this may have a great influence on the fertility of the mother and the appearance of future offspring. Wow, wouldn't that be great? Just have a great picture up there and your kids are going to be gorgeous. Right? So, and I show you some examples where in the bedroom there's a virgin and child. So, there she is. And this Botticelli's Madonna of the Magnificat was actually considered the most valuable, probably because of the frame, the most valuable work in the inventory. But Botticelli is able, even with an image of the Virgin and Child, to reference hoped for children and spring. The circular format would relate to the present. When you've had a baby, you get a desco di parto, a birth tray in the circular format. There's one in the Met. And then look what Jesus and Mary are grasping here. A pomegranate. Now in good Christian iconography that refers to the blood of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ, but in mythology, what does it refer to? Persephone. And so when does Persephone get to come out from the underworld? In spring. So even in an image of the Virgin and Child, it relates back to the theme that's presented first in the Primavera, then under control in Minerva and the Centaur, and then given a Christian kind of overshadowing here. So this is when I started trying to really, how I began to understand how these images functioned in their own time. We go and we stand in the Uffizi and we look at these images and they're breathtakingly beautiful, but they're completely out of context. They're not even hung together, which really upsets me. And so it puts a completely different spin on it. So then I started thinking, okay, well, what do I do with this image? And why is it on canvas? And this must relate to a marriage too, but didn't know what. So what are we seeing here? Botticelli is doing the same thing, but differently. He is absorbing classical texts, classical sculptures, and more contemporary texts. He's showing us, is it the birth of Venus? It's really the arrival of Venus. She's being blown in. And we're going to find out the same way that he's looking at contemporary texts. Poliziano was Lorenzo's in-house poet, and Homer. And we know that this poem was known because it was published in 1488, but was already known before that in manuscript. So in many ways, Botticelli's Birth of Venus is a much more traditional image or less complex image than the Primavera. It pretty much illustrates these texts. But it also is profoundly sexy and kind of weirdly unsexy at the same time. She has a strange body. It's clearly weightless because otherwise that shell would be tipped over. But she's drawing attention to her private parts, which is, wrong way. Which is classical, the Venus Pudica, which of course she's trying to be modest, but in effect she's drawing your eyes right to those parts of her. And he also is in very good humanist fashion. We're kind of referencing a painting that was described in Pliny, of Venus rising from the sea by the greatest classical painter, Apelles, which was then given to Augustus and dedicated to, put in the temple for his father. So Medici or whomever are playing with all those references as well. And then we have to say that there are just so many references to love that just makes it seem it has to relate to a wedding. We've got roses, symbols of love. When Venus loved Adonis and she's rushing to his rescue, she pricks her finger and all the roses are turned, white roses are turned red. Bulrushes, the seeds are blown by the wind to propagate. The anemone is the wind flower. And so we have the flowers blowing her ashore, and of course the shore is going to green and become fertile. So the big puzzle was, okay, if it's connected to a marriage, what wedding? And I also wanted to show you that the nude Venus has a foundation in the customs of the time, that inside many of these wedding chests, you would find a private image of a nude Venus or a nude female. So you lift up the lid and there's your nude. And in that chest, which would be given to the bride by the husband, she would keep her trousseau. So there's a tradition for the reclining, we'll see reclining nudes in a bit, but for a nude to be present in the bedchamber. So, and there's also a tradition, remember I was saying you're supposed to be chaste and sexy at the same time. At this moment there developed a tradition of wedding poetry, which looks back to antiquity. And I had to put this one on. Lascivious Venus advises girls to sleep without clothes and to deny no pleasures to their insistent husbands. All right, so things are changing in the latter half of the 15th century. Perhaps women are allowed to take their clothes off, and perhaps they're supposed to enjoy sex. We'll see more of that in a minute. So what wedding? Well, Lorenzo de Medici almost never went to a foreign wedding. That means non-Florentine. But we know he went to Bologna for the wedding of Annibale Bentivoglio and Lucrezia. And they got married in 1487. Now, and we also know, hold on, that was a huge deal. Palaces were torn down, streets were widened, festivities went on for 8 days. And this isn't one of those, but huge carts would be constructed and triumphal arches would be erected to celebrate the arrival of Lucrezia. And we also know that Annibale's parents, Giovanni and Ginevra Bentivoglio, were allies of the Medici, close friends of Lorenzo, and we can imagine would have been influenced by Lorenzo. Just imagine Lorenzo calls up Giovanni, I hear your son is getting married. Let me send you my favorite artist, or let my favorite artist, Botticelli, paint something for you to decorate their bedchamber. And it would be much easier to take a very large painting rolled up in canvas from Florence to Bologna than it would be one on a wood panel. So last year, if you went to the Frick, you saw this painting, which was visiting from Scotland. And I'm standing there, and I'm looking at it, and I thought, it's on canvas too? It's very unusual to have a Botticelli on canvas. And so this is my fantasy. I can't document it, but what if this, like his Madonna of the Magnificat, accompanied this to decorate the bridal chamber of Annibale and Lucrezia. So you'd have a similar kind of packaging where, and his women all look the same, so we can't really make a lot of that, but we have a virgin, we have similar roses, and a Jesus who looks like he's coming right out of her birth canal, right? So there's something sensual and emphasizing the fecundity of the Virgin and of Venus. So how did it get from Bologna to the Medici villa at Castello? Well, the Bentivoglio were threatened and attacked by the army of Julius II. Their palace was sacked in 1507. And guess who was there with Julius? The future Leo X, Medici, Giovanni de Medici. And just maybe he rescued his favorite artist's work, this one, and rolled it up and took it back to Florence. We know it wasn't in Florence when Savonarola was having a fit and burning all the lascivious paintings. So perhaps he rescued the birth of Venus, brought it back to Florence or to the villa at Castello. And our Florentine visit has, tied up 5 exquisite Botticellis, all with a similar theme around marriage. And before we leave Florence, I just want to look quickly at this because this kind of makes the segue to Venice. Botticelli's Mars and Venus. Now, the shape gives us the clue that this may have been inlaid over a bed. And certainly the subject is of interest. We see Venus fully in control of everything, completely clothed, not in disarray at all. And Mars, not only is he without his armor, and these funny little satyrs are playing with it, he's passed out. He is really in a post-coital state. And we remember Camilla and the Centaur. Venus' love is command over the passion and fieriness of Mars. And we again have a contemporary text and an ancient text that talk about Mars being overwhelmed or mastered by Venus. So again, a similar kind of theme that took Botticelli 3 paintings to do for Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's bedroom, and here one says it all. And it's very likely that this connects to a Vespucci marriage because in this tree trunk are lots of wasps, Vespucci. I have not found the specific marriage that it relates to, but it seems unquestionable that this would be related to a wedding commission. Okay, and what Botticelli has done with all of these images is he's the ultimate sponge. He's taken from antiquity, he's taken from contemporary texts, he's looked at reliefs, sarcophagi, and he's put it all together in his slow cooker and created one of the most magnificent works of art. It's his own creation. He's created his own mythology, his own story to celebrate a marriage and to ensure that that marriage will work. So we're going to leave the linearity of Florence and go to the sensuality and the color of Venice. But we're staying within the same tradition. We have Giorgione's Sleeping Venus. Scholars, again, get very uncomfortable. They don't really want to talk about the sensuality of this image. Originally, it was painted out, there was a Cupid here, which was the only clue to her identity. And what particularly made people uncomfortable was her gesture. What are we looking at? Why is she asleep? That makes it easier to look at. But what is she doing with her hand? And I'm going to show you, there are two texts, I'm only going to show you one of them, in which physicians begin to say that in order to conceive, both the male and the female have to reach arousal. So this is the whole, we don't have to read the whole thing. It basically says if you're going to get pregnant, you better come. And so this would be permissible within the church because the function of marriage is to produce babies. And we know that this was associated, it was in the Marcello Palace, it was seen in the 1530s by Marcantonio Michiel, and it was related to a Marcello wedding. So shape tells us, subject tells us that this is intended to foster a productive, fertile marriage. Now, before we end with Venus of Urbino, I had this kind of thought of another of Titian's great paintings in the Borghese Gallery. And we're taking a little side tour here to this 1514 image. Again, it's the same shape. It is called Sacred and Profane Love. We don't have any idea whether that was its original title. The first time it's described, I think in the later 16th century, it was called Titian's Image of Two Loves. The next time it's referred to, it's Three Loves, 1, 2, 3. And then about 100 years after that, it starts being called Sacred and Profane Love. Now this painting, which is known to connect to a marriage, a very kind of gossipy marriage, because Niccolo Aurelio was in his 40s, maybe I think even 50s, and he married a widow from Padua, whose father and first husband had been executed for treason. So it's an unusual commission. Plus, art historians, and I've tried, art historians argue both ways. For some, she's sacred. For others, she's sacred. And I've gone back and forth, and finally I've come to the place of saying, well, okay, they have arguments for both sides, and I'm not going to take you through each one. I think Titian is doing the same thing Botticelli was doing. I think he's doing his own thing. He's basing his image on a rich tradition, both contemporary and ancient, and he's basically saying both aspects of love are necessary in marriage. So I have never been able to shed the Panaskian view, or the view that she's sacred, because to me she's really not very sexy. Hold on. She's far more idealized, and she's holding a flame. And that flame for me is more about sacred rather than passion. So we go back to her. And the fact that there's this church spire dominates it for me. She's higher, and she's reaching into the sky. So for me, she's always been sacred. But I've read the arguments that say, no, marriage is sacred, so this is the sacred. But here is this woman is dressed like a contemporary bride. She's got the belt, she's got the red and white, she's got her hair down, she's got gloves on, and Petrarch likes to make a big deal about taking the glove off was really a turn on. And she's holding roses and a wedding gift. And then between, and Cupid, naughty boy, is on her side. And he's stirring things up, which Cupid certainly was wont to do. And he's stirring things up right over the central part, which is about as phallic as you can see. Yeah? And this, of course, is the husband's coat of arms. There was an art historian who swore that Laura Bagherotti's coat of arms was there, but during restoration, they can't find it. So either somebody saw what they wanted to see, or it's been lost. But good enough, we've got Niccolo's coat of arms next to the faucet, which alludes absolutely to sexuality. And there's been a lot of discussion about what's represented in the fountain sarcophagus. Well, horses are sexual. And an unbridled horse is the same as like the centaur, unbridled sexuality. So this horse is trying to be restrained, the bride. And here, probably it could be a reference to Venus and Adonis, where Mars gets really upset and beats up Adonis, kills him, whatever. Or that within love, there's always strife. And similarly, maybe we should go in the background, hold on. Similarly, the background also has both aspects on both sides. So don't miss the bunnies. Bunnies are always about fertility, and there they are, so kind of very prominently connected to her. But we have hounds chasing a hare, which has also been talked about as kind of unbridled sexuality, and we have a loving couple who are quite naughty here. But I think when you start looking at the background, seeing that both aspects, like the guarded castle, her virginity, both aspects are on both sides. So I really have arrived at Titian is creating a new communication, is creating his own mythology that relates to this unusual marriage. And then I thought, this is not a very sexy picture. So here we have a marriage image without all that sensual allure. Well, Laura already knew how to do it. It's her second marriage, and I'm just wondering whether it's an entirely different message that's required, more about a combination of different kinds of love, than a one that's supposed to get the guy able to procreate with the very young girl. And as we're talking about very young girls, oops, this painting, now about 20 years later, in the 1530s, we assume it was commissioned by Guidobaldo del Rovere, but we don't know that for sure. We just know he wanted it. And he writes to Titian and says, "Where is my picture of a nude?" Now, 2 years before this is painted, he was, or 3 years, he was married to a 10-year-old girl. Now, it's not as bad as that. They would have the marriage, but then the girl would stay with her parents until she got old enough. So there's no problem with this being several years after his documented marriage. And the overt sexuality of this image, which goes back to the Giorgione, which makes marriage fertile, and she is speaking to us. That's why Mark Twain had such a problem with this. I mean, he goes in to the Uffizi and he freaks out, the foulest, the vilest, the obscenest picture the world possesses. Oh, I didn't know Mark Twain was such a prude. So back to her. What makes us uncomfortable is that she's looking at us. And she's looking at us in an unabashed way. And she has really nothing to identify her as Venus, except that she's nude. Now, then people go, well, no bride would have herself painted. Well, no, Titian's going to use one of his models, most of whom were courtesans, but the purpose is the same. The purpose is to create a sensual environment to make sure the marriage is productive. And Guidobaldo's mother, dog, is lying there. I mean, is this just a coincidence that the same dog is painted by Titian with his mother and with his, not really his bride, but with an image that relates to his bride? And we put her not in a grassy knoll, but in a bedroom, in a domestic space, where we don't know, are they putting her clothes away, or are they rushing to get her clothes, to get her dressed? And all emphasis is on this part of her. Look how he constructs that painting. That painting emphasizes one part, which is the purpose of marriage. And so I close that everything's about love. And the best paintings are about love. And this is why we love looking at these images, that they speak to us in the same way that I think they spoke to people then. We're not so different. They knew their ancient texts a lot better than we do, but the great artist goes beyond a text, goes beyond the necessity of a portrait, and speaks poetry. And that's what these are as well, poems in paint. Thank you.